and welcome to Leadership Table Talk, a show designed to help you develop and improve your leadership skills and talents. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Gillam, a retired Air Force colonel and former member of the Senior Executive Service Corps with the Department of Defense at the Pentagon. When you hear the term dark horse, do you think about a four-star general? Well, in today's episode, we're going to hear how this one-time dark horse rose from being an Airman Basic in the Air Force to becoming one of 9 African-American four-star general officers. His struggles, hard work, commitment, leadership, and faith are all chronicled in his latest Amazon #1 best-selling book, Dark Horse. So please help me to welcome retired General Larry O. Spencer. General, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I certainly appreciate everything that you are doing. And congratulations on all your success, but thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. I'm so honored to have you here today. So let's just begin. How does a young man from Southeast Washington, D.C. go from being an Airman Basic in the Air Force to not only becoming a four-star general, but the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and you were not a pilot? So, sir, please tell us a little bit of your story.
Well, that's a good question. And, you know, one of the reasons I wrote the book Dark Horse was because folks would ask me, you know, how did you become a four-star? And frankly, I think that's the wrong question because, you know, I think we all should focus on the job we have right now and not worry so much about where we will end up. But I wanted to let folks know that it really doesn't matter where you start, where you were born, what circumstances you started with. It's that anyone, if they're willing to put in the work and they're willing to have the commitment that they can achieve any goal they want to achieve. So in my case, I was born and raised in Southeast DC. It was an interesting upbringing, especially if you think back in the 50s and 60s. You know, there was no legal segregation, but I was essentially practically segregated because my neighborhood was all black, my school was all black, my church was all black, and so everything about my environment was, you know, everyone that looked like me. And that was okay. It was a great, you know, I had great friends and great parents. But the dilemma I had was when I looked at people and things associated with success, they did not look like me. When I went to the doctor wasn't black. When my father went to go buy a car. You know, when we went into professional establishments or filed our taxes, you know, folks that our society deems as successful did not look like me. And so that was a dilemma for me sort of growing up. And you know, it was, although, you know, I had great parents, it was a pretty tough neighborhood in Southeast, still is today for that matter. And so, you know, I had challenges like a lot of inner city kids do with, you know, fortunately for me back then, neither drugs were as influential, as heavy as they later became, and guns weren't as prevalent in the neighborhood as they are today. But certainly a lot of fighting and, you know, getting in trouble and that sort of thing, you know, really were things I had to deal with. I'll just give you one quick story that happened to me that, you know, really ended up being a life lesson. You know, when I was 10, 11 years old, my father was in the Army, and because we had a family of 6 and my mother didn't work, my mother hadn't graduated from high school. And so my father, to supplement his income, he worked at the NCO club at Walter Reed out at the base out there. And to make a long story short, he worked late 3 days a week. So on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I knew I could get away with a lot more than I could, you know, with my mother than I could with my father. And so I would hang out. I'll be honest with you. I'd hang out on the street on the corner a lot later than I should have. And on one Friday, it was kind of cold. It was in the wintertime, and I was hanging out with my friends. So they decided that, you know, why don't we go, you know, steal some snacks for the weekend? I had never stolen anything. My parents, particularly my father, was very strict about disciplining us and making sure we didn't do things like that. So, but the peer pressure was there, and I said, okay, sort of reluctantly. And the interesting thing about this plan is the plan called for me to actually do the taking of the snacks, not them. Again, a lesson I didn't learn until after that. So we went over to the store, and it was an older type store on the corner. It had a grill in it. It had a row of phone booths. Most folks have never seen a phone booth before, but and then it was a store and had big mirrors around it. So to make a long story short, I went in. The plan was for my friends to distract the manager by ordering at the grill while I would go around the store stuffing my pockets full of candy and snacks. And so I did that, and I started to walk out of the store, and the manager came over to me and said, "Wait a minute, let me see what's in your pockets." And of course, I had all that, all the candy and stuff stuffed in my pockets, my coat pocket. And he said, "Well, what are you doing? I mean, you can't steal out of the store." And then unfortunately, I did what a lot of, young 10, 12-year-olds would do, even today at that point in my life, was I started lying. And so I started making up stories, I forgot my money, and, if you just let me go home and get the money, I'll come back. And this guy was smart. He had seen this before. So he said, "No, I'm not going to let you do that." And he said, "I tell you what," and I didn't find out until I talked to this guy years later that, he had seen me with the big mirrors. So he knew what I had done, but he also knew that I wasn't a bad kid, and he just wanted to teach me a lesson. So he got really tough with me, and he said, "Look, I had a young guy not like you not long ago. I had him put in jail for stealing out of here. So you're going to get put in jail unless you can get your parents to come up here and get you out." So I didn't know what to do. I really didn't. And there was he said, "Go call your parents and have them come up here." I said, "Okay." And so I went into one of the phone booths. I didn't even have the dime to put in the phone booth to make a call. So I pretended. I put my hand up at the coin slot, pretended to put a dime in the phone booth, in the slot, and pretended to talk on the phone. Now, thinking back this in hindsight, that was ridiculous. But I pretended to talk on the phone. I hung up the phone, and then I came out and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry, my parents aren't home. They are working." And again, one of my buddies, who supposedly my friend, yelled out to the store manager, your mother doesn't work, your mother's at home, because they thought this was funny. And so about this time, and he also says, generally when you put a dime in the slot, I can hear the change come down and it makes a sound. And he said, "I didn't even hear you put a dime in the slot. So what are you talking about?" So at that point, I was completely busted. I was about to confess. And the guy said, "Look, just give me the stuff back and get out of here. And don't you ever come back again." And so that scared me enough to teach me two very critical life lessons. Number one, which I'd already been taught by my parents and I'd already learned in Sunday school: don't steal. And so I never attempted to steal anything ever again. The other thing, though, that it taught me was be careful who you hang around with, because those guys, they knew that the most dangerous part of our scheme was me. I didn't know any better, and they were supposedly my friends, and they figured if I got caught, then they would be in the clear. So I have a lot of stories like that I tell in Dark Horse that sort of shaped who I am. But I went on from there. And I wasn't a good student in school. I was really poor. The school system was really bad, and the environment back then, and quite frankly, it's not that different than it is today. Because today I speak in a lot of local junior high schools and high schools here in the DC area. And it's surprising to me how a lot of particularly the males, young males have, when I ask them what they want to do with their life, they give me, two options. One is to be, a great NFL star, or, football, basketball player. So to be an athlete. The other is to be, the next Jay-Z or next rap singer, and they don't seem to have a plan B. Now, let me pause for a second, and I'm not saying this because you're the host of the show, but one of the things I've learned over my lifetime that I think is a provable fact, and that is, generally speaking, women are a lot smarter than men. And so I have learned over time that when I go into the schools, the young women in the schools seem to have their act together. They have a plan. A lot of the young men don't, and I try to convince them that they need to have a plan and that they need to focus on education. But in my case, I barely graduated high school, played a lot of, my primary sport was football, although I played every sport they had. But here was the dilemma. I had college coaches offering me football scholarships, but I was the oldest of 6 kids. As I mentioned, my mother hadn't graduated high school. My father graduated high school, but he was in the Army. No one in my family had gone to college. And so I was pretty much lost. I had college coaches asking me about football. I had poor grades in school. I had poor SAT scores. And so I was essentially lost. And so I got a little summer job over in the Census Bureau. It was a GS1, just trying to make a little change until I figured out what I was going to do. And one day, this was in the fall, I was just sitting in my parents' basement thinking, man, this is not going to work. I'm not going to college, apparently. I don't really have a job making enough money to go live on my own. And so one day, out of the blue, I was over in a mall near the Census Bureau, and I was walking through the mall. Now, I'm going to ask you to use your imagination here, because out of the blue, and based on the sign of the times, this was the early 70s. I remember I purchased a purple jumpsuit with matching purple high platform shoes and a wide brim black. I wouldn't be caught dead in that today, but that's what I bought back then.
I remember
and so
that
I
story.
had that bag in my hand, and I was walking down the mall, and I noticed the Air Force recruiter's office, and I noticed the great neat-looking airplanes. And so I was just standing outside watching. And then all of a sudden, the recruiter came out. We got into a conversation. One thing led to another. And I literally sort of stumbled into his office. And when I stumbled out of there, I was in the Air Force. Completely unplanned, inexplicable even today. My parents didn't know anything about it. And so that was my entree from the inner city, Washington, D.C. and Southeast into the United States Air Force as an enlisted member. And so that's how I ended up in the Air Force.
Oh, sir, that is awesome. As you were telling those stories, it took me back to the book because I read the entire book and I have it here. And but I wanted to ask you, the Chief Master Sergeant who actually saw the potential that was in you, and he encouraged you to go to college and then go on to the Officers Training School. Can you talk about that?
Yes, that was it was clearly a turning point in my life. I was in the Air Force. My first assignment was as a young airman, one striper, was in North Carolina. This is interesting thinking about it in hindsight, but I got married very early. My wife and I were married 19 years old with one kid and one on the way, if you can imagine that, at 19 years old. And my 2 sons were 11 months apart. So picture this. I'm 19-year-old, I have a young son, and my wife tells me she's pregnant again, and my son's not even a year old. And so when all of that happens, my boss calls me in and says, guess what? You're going overseas for a year. And I said, you have got to be kidding me, because it was an unaccompanied, what we called a remote tour in Taiwan. So I had to go by myself. So that was very traumatic, but I couldn't get out of it. And so I had to go. So again, I'm going to ask you to use your imagination. So back then, now it seems silly in hindsight, but back then, long hair was the style.
Yes.
And even as an airman, I had an afro like you wouldn't believe. And it took, all I could do to pack that thing down every night with the stocking cap so that I could just barely make it to work without someone coming up to me telling me I needed a haircut. When I got to that overseas assignment in Taiwan, I had a bet with my airman friends that I could go an entire year without a haircut. And I went an entire year without a haircut. I mean, it's unbelievable that I could disguise all that hair. And so I came back to the States. I was stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, which is, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Air Force, it was a strategic air command base. And what that means is it was a very strict, by the book, spit and polish command. And so I was really worried about how am I going to disguise my hair. Again, in hindsight, I would have just got a haircut and not thought about it. But you're talking about a 19, 20-year-old, who's just trying to be like the rest of his peers, and everyone else had long hair. So we pushed the boundaries of the standards. And so one week, and in fact, it was so long, my wife would braid my hair during the weekends. And I know that's hard to believe today. I actually wish I could grow hair like that now, but unfortunately I can't. But one weekend, I didn't have time to fix my hair, so to speak, or get it packed down. So here I am sitting in the office first thing in the morning in uniform with all of this hair. But this was before my boss came in. And out of nowhere, a chief master sergeant, and again, for those of you who aren't familiar with the military, in the Air Force, a chief master sergeant is the top enlisted grade, an E9. And so this chief master sergeant, I was sitting in my office at my desk. He walked past the office, and I kind of wiped my brow saying, oh, I got away with it so far. And although, Michael Jackson, was young back then, this chief master sergeant literally did a moonwalk back to that doorway, looked at me and said, you have got to be kidding me. And so he asked me to get up from my desk and come with him. Of course, he was a chief master sergeant. I was a two-striper. I did what he said. I followed him outside. We got in his pickup truck. He took me over to the base barbershop. He paid the barber. He sat down in a chair with a big smile on his face and said, give him a military haircut. And I sit there on that chair and watched all of my hair fall on the floor of that barbershop. So after that, a couple of interesting things happened. He put me back in his truck, and rather than come right back to work, he took me over to the base park, and he said, hey, I want to talk to you. He said, now, I've noticed you, around the base. You seem like a pretty smart guy, pretty sharp guy. But he said, I don't understand. Why are you not following the Air Force regulations? If you want to grow long hair, fine. Get out of the Air Force and grow your hair as long as you want. He said, I understand the peer pressure, but he said, if you're going to be a United States Airman, then you need to follow the rules, and you need to be an airman and understand what the Air Force regulations are and follow them. And again, you want to get out of the Air Force and do whatever you want. And, no one had ever talked to me like that before. And so I said, Chief, you got a good point. And then he said, what are you doing with your life anyway? He said, I don't know if you're going to get out at 4 years or you want to stay in, but why are you wasting 4 years? Why aren't you taking college courses? Why aren't you trying to make yourself better? What are you doing? You're just sort of, biding time here. And I said, Chief, you're right. I've been thinking about taking college courses. Well, again, he was the chief. He said, you need to stop thinking about it. He says, by the way, I'm going to call your boss right now, tell him you're with me, and you and I are going over to the base education office. So he took me to the base education office. He signed me up for college courses that day. He then took me back to my office, and I was worried that he would get me in trouble with my boss, because he came in with me. He looked at my boss, who was a major, and then there was a tech sergeant that he knew that was in the office, who was our sort of office NCO in charge. He asked both of them to come in his office and in my boss's office, and they closed the door. So I figured, okay, I'm going to really get in trouble. He's in there telling him about my long hair, etc. And he came out of the office about 5 minutes later. He looked at me and said, hey, good luck on your courses. If you need any help, call me. And he went about his business. And I waited for my boss and the tech sergeant to come out. They just kind of looked at me, didn't say a word, and went on about their business. And so I didn't find out until several months later that what he told my boss and the tech sergeant was, I think that guy's pretty sharp. I'd like to mentor him. Let's keep an eye on him and see if we can get this guy, off on a good foot on his career. And I tell you what, that Chief Master Sergeant, not only did he change my life, but he mentored me until he got out of the Air Force. And then even after he he retired from the Air Force. He continued to call me and encourage me. How you doing? What courses are you taking? What are your grades like? I mean, that one guy just completely changed the trajectory of my life. Because one thing I didn't mention was one of the byproducts, unfortunately, of growing up in an inner city is, your self-esteem and your self-worth kind of takes a hit because you don't see folks around you that are successful. And you see a lot of negativity around you. And again, I was a poor student in school, so once he got me in college, he helped develop my self-confidence and my self-worth. And I discovered that, it wasn't me. I just didn't have confidence in myself, and I didn't know how to study. So once I learned how to study, and I really got hooked on learning. I mean, I love, you offer me a course today in any topic, and I'll jump on it. I just love learning to this day. And so he literally changed my life. And the one thing that I try to capture in the book, I hope I do, in addition to that story, was how important mentorship is and how important it is to latch on to people who are really successful and people that you admire and ask them for help. We all need help. We all need support. We all need folks that we can go to when we have issues that we need to talk over with someone. By the way, I hope I was trying to do that with you when we were stationed together at Hill Air Force Base, because it also taught me that I need to do that for others. And so I learned a lot of lessons from that Chief Master Sergeant. And from that point forward, every career move I had, every assignment that I had, one of the first things I did was try to go find me a senior NCO, as well as senior officers that I could lean on, that I could talk to, that could help me with my career and my life, and overall. So very impactful moment in my life, meeting that Chief Master Sergeant.
Absolutely, sir. I really love that story in the book. And I also love the story about your grandfather. And I know we don't have much time left in the interview, but could you briefly talk about the lesson that you learned from your grandfather?
Sure. Very quickly, one of the fortunate things in hindsight was, although I grew up in D.C., my grandfather owned a farm in Southwest Virginia, large farm, about 60 acres. But it was just he and my grandmother and my cousin, who was my same age. They were raising my cousin. And so I would go down in the summers and spend it with my cousin and my grandparents. And I would work in his tobacco fields during the summer, which, again, back then, I hated it. I mean, here I'm a city kid, getting up at 5:30 in the morning, going out to work in the tobacco field. But in hindsight, I loved it. So quickly, our normal routine was to get up in the morning, have a great breakfast, feed the hogs, all the normal chores of a farm, get on the tractor and ride out to one of the many tobacco fields. In this case, it was two things a little bit different. One is, this particular summer, my cousin was in Philadelphia visiting his mother, so he wouldn't come down until about 2 weeks later. The other thing is that one morning, rather than get on the tractor, he went and hitched up his horse, which was a little bit odd. But he hitched up a platform to the back of the horse, and then he put a plow on the back of the platform, told me to get on the platform, and off we went behind this horse, pulling the platform out to one of the fields in the North 40. And so we got out there, and I'm fascinated. I'm a city kid. I'd never seen this before. Just fascinated. When he took the plow, hitched it to the back of the horse, he got in behind the reins and started plowing these rows. My grandmother was going to use it for a vegetable garden, but he started plowing these perfect rows up and down, just in rhythm with the horse, just beautiful. And I'm watching this, just fascinated. And so about halfway through, he had to take a potty break, so he goes off into the woods, and I'm thinking, okay, my grandfather, he'd been trying to mentor me, particularly since I was there by myself with him. And we were both relatively introverted, didn't talk a lot, but he decided to, give me pearls of wisdom. As an example, one thing he told me was, a blind rooster finds a kernel of corn every once in a while. I have no idea what that means, but those are the pearls of wisdom that he tried to impart on me. He told me the difference between a donkey and a mule. Okay, I know the difference now, but I'm not sure why I needed to know that. So I wanted to impress him. And so I got up when he disappeared into the woods. And keep in mind, I'm 10, 11 years old. The plow is about the same size as I am. I knew nothing about plowing. I barely got this plow upright. And I got behind the behind the reins of the horse. I knew how to make the horse go forward. So I gave the command for the horse to start walking. And so the horse starts walking. The problem is there is an art to plowing, which I didn't have, and balancing the plow to keep it straight, staying in rhythm with the horse, all of those things I had no knowledge of. And so unfortunately, the horse starts walking diagonally across my grandfather's perfectly plowed rows. And so I'm ruining a half a day's work that my grandfather just put in. The other thing is, I'll pause here for a second, because I don't advocate this, and I'm not suggesting this as something that people should do. But in the 60s, on a farm by yourself, you could whip your kids. And in fact, on a farm, if anyone else found out about it, not only would they not say anything, but they would encourage it. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'm going across my grandfather's rows. He's never had to discipline me before, but I'm going to get my first whipping. And by the way, the tool of choice for discipline in those days was called a switch, which was, anyone from the South knows what that is. It's essentially a branch off of a tree, and there's trees as far as the eye can see out there in the middle of nowhere. And so as he came out of the woods, he yelled at me and he said, "Larry, what are you doing?" And keep in mind, I'm just 10, 11 years old. So I instinctively tried to turn around to look at him, but the horse is still walking. And so I stumble and almost fall. And just instinctively, I yell out, "Whoa," trying to steady myself. And of course, that was the command to make the horse stop, which I didn't know. So the horse stops. I'm standing there looking at all these tree branches, having ruined my grandfather's work, and him storming across the field. And when he got up to me, the first thing he said was, "Are you okay?" Which I was not expecting, but I was a little bit encouraged, at least for a second. And then he said something to me that is not very articulate, perhaps, maybe could have been said a little better, but he said something that shaped the rest of my life. And that was, he said, "It's okay to try and fail, but it's not okay not to try." In other words, what he told me was he was proud of me, even though I didn't know what I was doing. He was proud of me for trying. And by the way, in your life, there's always going to be things that you're going to be scared of doing, worried about doing. People are going to tell you can't do it, but you should go try anyway. And also, by the way, recognize that occasionally you're going to fail, but that's okay. Get up, go try anyway, get up and keep going.
Sir, I don't know where the time has gone, but it looks like it has gone for today. But I want to thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come and talk about your latest book, Dark Horse. I also want to thank our audience for watching Leadership Table Talk. And again, I just love that quote that your late grandfather said, "It's okay to try and fail, but it's not okay not to try." Again, thank you for watching. This is Dr. Mary Gillam, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye for today.